You're watching the sun set over Constantinople on May 29th, 1453. Behind you, the greatest city in the Christian world is burning. The screams have mostly stopped now. 1,000 years of Roman civilization is ending tonight, and you're one of the last people who will ever call themselves Roman. This isn't about the fall of Rome in 476. That was just the western half, a shell of an empire that had already collapsed from within. The real Roman Empire, the one that survived, the one that kept the libraries and the laws and the legions. That empire died on this night, and it died in the most brutal way possible. Let's go back 3 months. Constantinople in early 1453 was a city living on borrowed time. Once home to 500,000 people, now barely 50,000 huddled behind walls that hadn't been breached in 1,000 years. The Byzantine Empire, the continuation of Rome itself, had shrunk to just the city and a few surrounding territories. Everything else, gone, taken by the Ottoman Turks, who now surrounded them on all sides. Emperor Constantine XI knew what was coming. 21-year-old Sultan Mehmed II had been obsessed with taking Constantinople since he was a child. He'd been called Mehmed the Mad by his own people. Now he had the largest army the world had seen in centuries, and he was bringing it to the walls. On April 2nd, the Ottomans arrived. 80,000 soldiers, hundreds of ships, and something new. Something the world had never seen used like this before. Massive cannons. The largest one was 27 feet long, could fire a 1,200-pound stone ball over a mile. It took 60 oxen to move it, and 100 men to operate it. The man who built it, a Hungarian engineer named Urban, had actually offered his services to Constantine first, but the Byzantines couldn't afford to pay him, so he went to Mehmed instead. That decision would help end an empire. The Byzantines had 7,000 defenders. Maybe 8,000 if you counted every able-bodied person they could arm. They were outnumbered more than 10 to 1, but they had those walls. 3 layers of walls, the inner one 40 feet high and 15 feet thick. No army had ever broken through them. The Byzantines had held this city against countless sieges. Arabs, Bulgars, Russians, even other Christians during the Crusades. The walls had never fallen. Mehmed didn't care about history. On April 6th, the bombardment began. Those massive cannons fired day and night. The sound was so loud people went deaf. The ground shook constantly. Buildings throughout the city developed cracks. Each shot from the great cannon could punch a hole clean through the outer wall. The Byzantines would repair the damage at night, piling up earth and timber behind the breaches. But every morning the cannons would tear it down again. For 6 weeks this continued. The defenders were exhausted, running on no sleep, constantly repairing walls, fighting off assault after assault. Mehmed sent wave after wave of soldiers at the walls, using his regular troops to wear down the defenders, saving his elite janissaries for when the Byzantines were too tired to fight effectively. The Byzantines had one advantage at sea. The Ottoman fleet couldn't get into the Golden Horn, the harbor, because the Byzantines had stretched a massive chain across the entrance. Ships couldn't break it. So Mehmed did something insane. He built a greased road over the hills behind the city and dragged 70 ships overland, around the chain, and launched them into the Golden Horn from the other side. The Byzantines woke up one morning to find enemy ships inside their protected harbor. It was psychologically devastating. By late May, everyone knew the end was close. Constantine made a final plea to the west for help. Some did come. A Genoese commander named Giovanni Giustiniani brought 700 professional soldiers. A few other ships slipped through the Ottoman blockade, but no major relief force was coming. The Pope had promised a crusade, but it never materialized. Venice debated sending their fleet, but moved too slowly. Constantinople was alone. On May 28th, Mehmed gave the order for a final assault. It would come before dawn the next day. He told his soldiers they could plunder the city for 3 days, take whatever they wanted, keep whatever slaves they captured. It was a death sentence for everyone inside. That night, the city held a final prayer service in the Hagia Sophia, the great church that had stood for 900 years. Catholics and Orthodox Christians, who'd hated each other for centuries, prayed together. Everyone knew these were their last hours. Constantine gave a final speech to his commanders. No one recorded exactly what he said, but witnesses remembered. He spoke about dying with honor, about the legacy of Rome, about defending their faith and their families. Then he went to the walls to wait for dawn. The attack began at 1:30 in the morning on May 29th. Not dawn. Mehmed wanted darkness. Wave after wave of soldiers hit the walls. The irregulars first, then the regular army, then finally the janissaries. The fighting was insane. Hand-to-hand combat on top of the walls in the dark, lit only by fires burning throughout the city. The Byzantines were holding, barely, killing Ottomans by the hundreds. Then, something small happened that changed everything. A small gate called the Kirkoporta, in a section of the wall where it met the palace complex. Someone had used it during a sortie earlier in the siege and forgot to lock it when they came back in. Or it was left open deliberately by a traitor. Sources disagree. An Ottoman soldier noticed it was open. He went through, then another, then 50, then hundreds. They came up behind the defenders on the walls. The Byzantines suddenly found themselves fighting on two fronts. Panic spread. At almost the same moment, Giustiniani, the Genoese commander who'd been holding a critical section, got hit by a bullet or a piece of shrapnel that went through a gap in his armor. He fell, badly wounded. His men carried him off the walls to get him to a ship, to save his life. It created a gap in the defenses. The Ottomans poured through. Constantine saw his empire dying in real time. He threw off his imperial regalia so he wouldn't be recognized, drew his sword, and charged into the mass of Ottoman soldiers flooding through the walls. No one ever saw him alive again. The last Roman emperor died fighting like a common soldier, his body lost among thousands of corpses. The city fell before sunrise. What came next was horror. Mehmed had promised his soldiers 3 days of plunder. They took it. Thousands were killed in the streets. Tens of thousands were enslaved. Churches were ransacked. The Hagia Sophia, where people had taken refuge thinking it was sanctuary, was forced open. Everyone inside was chained and taken as slaves. Libraries that held the only copies of ancient texts were burned. Artwork that had survived from the classical age was destroyed or melted down. Families that traced their lineage back to the Rome of Caesar were ended. A direct line of succession going back to Augustus in 27 BC was severed. By noon on May 29th, it was over. Mehmed entered the city on horseback. He rode to the Hagia Sophia, dismounted, picked up a handful of dirt and poured it over his head as a sign of humility before God. Then he claimed the church as a mosque. Constantinople became Istanbul. The Byzantine Empire became a memory. The fall sent shockwaves through Europe. Greek scholars fled west, bringing their books and knowledge, helping spark the Renaissance. The old trade routes through Constantinople were now controlled by the Ottomans, pushing Europeans to find new paths to Asia, leading directly to the age of exploration. Columbus sailing west to find India. That doesn't happen without Constantinople falling. The Ottomans would go on to conquer most of southeastern Europe, nearly taking Vienna twice. They'd remain a major world power for another 4 centuries. But that's their story. This story is about an ending, about the last night of Rome. Not the Rome of the Colosseum, but the Rome that survived it by 1,000 years. The Rome that preserved Roman law, that kept the Greek classics alive through the Dark Ages, that stood as a Christian bulwark in the East, while Western Europe fragmented into feuding kingdoms. That Rome ended on May 29th, 1453, in fire and blood, with an emperor whose body was never found, in a city that would never again be Christian. No dramatic last words were recorded, no speeches survived, just the screams, the fires, and then silence, as the sun rose on a world where Rome no longer existed.